The first sound was a cry that didn't belong, slicing through the sterile hum of the hospital corridor. David whispered, "That's not possible," as his pulse thundered in his ears. The nurse looked at him with trembling lips, her voice breaking as she said, "The child is yours." He staggered backward, the weight of invisible walls crushing him, as if the polished floors had turned to quicksand. David muttered, "No one told me, no one ever said." His chest burned with denial, yet his eyes betrayed the truth he didn't want to see. The baby's cry rose again, desperate and alive, echoing like an accusation meant only for him. The air reeked of antiseptic, but to David it carried the smell of betrayal, memory, and fear. His hands shook as though every nerve in his body had been rewired in an instant. He said, "This cannot be happening. It's a mistake. It has to be." But his voice cracked into silence. The nurse whispered the child's name again, a name that struck like lightning, and in that moment, David's world shattered. He whispered one last time, softer than breath, "My life was planned. Until now." The courtroom smelled of dust and echoes, a place where silence cut deeper than any verdict. David sat at the long oak table, palms flat, staring at a file that bore his name. Across from him, a lawyer read words that shattered the last pieces of control. The judge's voice echoed, "The test confirms paternity." David whispered, "No, this isn't real," but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Eyes burned into his back, whispers stirred the air, society's judgment heavier than the gavel's strike. David's breath quickened, and he felt like an intruder in his own life, as though everyone else already knew a secret he had just been forced to bear. The lawyer continued, his words cutting sharp, and David said, "They never told me, not once." The room swirled, oak walls pressing inward, and though he tried to steady his heart, it thundered louder, drowning the silence. The world narrowed to a child's name written on paper, and the impossible truth inked in legal black. David stumbled out of the courthouse, the sunlight too harsh, as if the world mocked his blindness. He muttered, "I never asked for this," his voice raw as though scraped against stone. People passed by, some glancing with suspicion, others with indifference, but to him every look carried judgment. The city noise roared too loudly, each car horn and footstep like a reminder that life outside continued without mercy. David's shoulders hunched as if the sky itself pressed down. His thoughts swirled, heavy with betrayal, every memory replayed under this new light. He whispered, "How long did they know?" His chest heaved, air thick with rage and sorrow, yet he couldn't breathe enough to steady his body. The world spun, shadows longer, faces blurred, and his own reflection in the courthouse glass looked like a stranger. David said softly, "I don't know how to be what they expect me to be." But the city did not listen. It swallowed him whole. At night, David sat alone in his apartment, shadows stretching across walls like accusations. The city's glow seeped through blinds, fractured into broken patterns. He whispered, "Everything was planned. Every step. Every goal." His voice cracked into silence, and tears he didn't invite traced down his cheek. Photographs on the shelf blurred through his watery gaze, reminders of a life he thought controlled. He clenched his fist, whispering again, "But nothing prepared me for this." The apartment seemed to shrink, air too heavy, every object taunting him with false security. He pressed his forehead against cold glass, the city distant and unfeeling, lights flickering like mockery. He asked the darkness, "What am I supposed to do?" But no answer came. Only his reflection stared back, fractured by tears, broken by truths he had never chosen. The night wrapped him in silence, and the weight of parenthood loomed like a shadow waiting at his door. The phone rang once, twice, then silence, before his mother's voice cracked through, stern yet weary. "David, is it true?" she asked, her tone trembling between accusation and fear. His hand tightened around the receiver, and he said, "I don't know what's true anymore." The line hissed with unspoken rage, the weight of family shame pressing across distance. She said, "You've destroyed us." And he could almost see her face, lips pursed, eyes hard. David's chest caved in, but he forced the words, "No one told me. I was never given a choice." The silence that followed was worse than her judgment. His breath faltered, each inhale shallow, as though even air had abandoned him. He whispered, "I never asked for this," but the phone clicked dead, her rejection louder than any words. The empty dial tone echoed in his ears, and he sat frozen, the line cutting him off from the last thread of belonging. David sat at the edge of his bed, the night pressing against the window like a weight. He whispered, "I thought I had my life mapped." His voice cracked, betraying the hollowness inside. Memories bled through. His father walking out when he was a boy, his mother's endless silence filling the void. He muttered, "I swore I'd never be like him." Yet here he was, a child's name echoing inside his chest, dragging him backward through wounds never healed. His hands trembled as he traced the scars of promises he once made, the kind no one ever believed. The city's hum beyond the glass mocked him, as if the world refused to pause. He said, "I can't carry this," but the words dissolved into the room. The truth was cruel. The child's existence didn't just rewrite his future, it carved open the oldest wound he carried, forcing him to face what he had always feared becoming. Morning light crept into the apartment, golden but unwelcomed. David sat at the table, a coffee untouched before him, its steam long vanished. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, every word a blade. He said, "She thinks I ruined everything." His fingers dug into the table as though grounding himself. He remembered being 12, overhearing her say, "Your father left because of him." The shame then was the same shame now, multiplying with each beat of his heart. He whispered, "What if I'm cursed to repeat it?" The child's face hovered in his imagination, fragile and waiting, yet he felt only dread. His chest clenched at the thought of becoming the very absence he had hated. He said, "I can't be him. I can't." But the silence of the apartment was merciless, offering no reassurance, only the echo of his breaking resolve. Later that day, David walked the park path, the air thick with the laughter of children. Each sound pierced him like arrows. He whispered, "They look so free." His steps faltered as he passed a father swinging his son high into the sky, their joy untouchable. He muttered, "I wouldn't know how to hold her." His breath quickened, shame flooding every vein, as though every parent's smile reflected his failure. He gripped the railing of a small bridge, staring at the water below, distorted ripples twisting his reflection. He said, "I don't deserve her." The words burned with finality. The weight of his childhood pressed in. The rejection, the loneliness, the silence he carried into adulthood. Now it threatened to smother him before he even touched the life he was supposed to protect. As evening fell, David sat across from Emily, the woman who once called him everything. Her eyes no longer held warmth, only ice. She asked, "So what are you going to do?" Her voice cut sharp, and David's chest clenched. He muttered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." Emily leaned back, crossing her arms, her silence louder than the city traffic beyond the window. The weight of betrayal hung between them, not just hers, not just his, but something shared and irreparable. He said, "Do you hate me for this?" Her lips pressed tight, and after a pause she whispered, "I don't even recognize you." The words struck harder than anger. He turned his face away, tears blurring the view outside, the skyline fractured like his life. He whispered, "I was never ready." But Emily's silence made it clear, no one cared about his readiness. Night deepened, and David wandered the empty streets, neon signs flickering like dying stars. He whispered, "I can't do this," his breath visible in the cold air. Every step felt like sinking, every shadow whispering failure. He saw himself reflected in a shop window. A man broken, unrecognizable. He muttered, "What would she see in me?" His voice cracked into nothing. The thought of the child, fragile and waiting, pressed harder against his chest. His hands trembled as though cradling an invisible weight. He whispered, If I walk away, maybe she'll be better off. The lie stung, burning deeper than truth. His reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, demanding an answer he couldn't give. The city swallowed his voice, leaving only silence. And in that silence, David knew that no matter what he chose, he was already marked by the child's existence. David sat at the long wooden dining table, the weight of silence pressing down harder than words. His mother finally broke it, her tone sharp as a blade. She said, "You've shamed this family." His heart stung as though struck. He whispered, "I didn't ask for this." Her eyes narrowed, the fire in them older than this moment. She said, "Excuses sound like your father's voice." His breath faltered, memories slamming into him like waves, each reminder of abandonment cutting deeper. David's chest tightened as he said, "I'm not him. I swear I'm not." But the words hung weak, easily broken. His mother leaned forward, her lips pressed thin, her voice trembling with cold fury. She said, "You're already failing her." The air grew unbearable, the room suffocating, as David lowered his eyes, unable to withstand the judgment. He muttered, "Maybe I'll never be enough." Emily stood at the apartment doorway, her arms crossed, her gaze colder than the night air outside. She said, "I don't trust you with her." David's jaw tightened, the sting sharper than any wound. He whispered, "She's mine too." Emily's lips curled into bitterness, her voice low and final. She said, "You weren't there. You never wanted this." David's chest heaved, his voice breaking. He said, "I didn't know she existed." Her eyes burned with unspoken rage, her silence worse than her words. The hallway felt endless, walls pressing tighter with every heartbeat. David muttered, "I'm trying, Emily." But she shook her head, her arms like armor. She said, "Trying doesn't protect a child." His shoulders slumped, his voice collapsing into despair. He whispered, "Then, what am I?" The door between them felt heavier than stone. At the cafe, David sat alone until Mark arrived, his childhood friend who once stood beside him through storms. Mark dropped into the chair opposite, his expression already hard. He said, "Everyone's talking, David. They're saying you're running from her." David's chest caved, shame rising like bile. He whispered, "I'm not running." Mark leaned closer, his voice sharp as a knife. He said, "Then why does it look like you are?" The air thickened between them, each word pressing heavier. David's eyes burned as he muttered, "I don't know how to be her father." Mark's hand slammed against the table, startling the silence. He said, "Then learn, or lose her." The words hit harder than any blow. David stared into his friend's eyes and saw only disappointment. He whispered, "I thought you'd understand." But Mark's silence said more than any judgment. The whispers of neighbors began to follow David like shadows. On the street, he heard them in hushed tones, their eyes slicing into him as they passed. One voice carried louder, dripping with scorn. A man muttered, "That's him, the one who abandoned his own child." David's hands curled into fists, his breath ragged. He whispered, "You don't know me." But the words barely left his lips, swallowed by their judgment. Each glance, each shake of the head carved into him, leaving scars deeper than the ones already carried. His chest burned, shame bleeding into rage. He said, "I never left her. I never had the chance." But no one listened. The air was thick with condemnation, and David felt his world shrink smaller with every step. His voice broke into silence, his heart screaming louder than his words. The lawyer's office smelled of polished wood and ink, every surface pristine, a place where truths were twisted into battles. David sat stiff, his pulse thundering. Across the desk, a stern figure adjusted glasses and spoke with chilling calm. He said, "If you want her, you'll have to fight." David's breath faltered, the word fight cutting deep. He whispered, "She's just a child." The lawyer leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice unyielding. He said, "Children are won or lost in courtrooms, not in promises." David's hands trembled, knuckles whitening against the chair. He muttered, "I can't lose her." The lawyer's face remained stone. He said, "Then be ready, because they'll use everything against you." David's heart raced, his body frozen. He whispered, "What if I'm not strong enough?" But silence answered, heavier than steel. The night was heavy, storm clouds pressing low as David sat across from his mother, the silence between them sharp as broken glass. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. She said, "David, you weren't supposed to know." His chest tightened, fear crawling through every vein. He whispered, "Know what?" Her eyes shifted, avoiding his, and he saw something unraveling in her gaze. She said, "That child, she isn't who you think." His breath caught, the world tilting under him. He muttered, "Don't lie to me now." Her hands trembled as she clutched her glass of water. She whispered, "The truth was hidden to protect you." The room spun, shadows stretching too long, the air suffocating. David whispered, "Whose child is she?" His mother's silence was worse than words. Finally she breathed, "Your brother. He's the father." The confession sliced through him like a blade, tearing apart every truth he held. David stumbled into the hallway, his body trembling as if the ground betrayed him. His brother Mark stood there, eyes cold, already waiting. David said, "It's you, isn't it?" Mark's jaw tightened, silence burning hotter than fire. Finally, he muttered, "I never wanted you to find out." David's fists clenched, fury pulsing through his veins. He said, "She's mine in the court's eyes. But in truth," Mark cut him off, his voice sharp as steel. He said, "She's mine by blood." David staggered back, the words crushing him. His voice cracked, "Why did you let me drown in this?" Mark's expression twisted, torn between anger and shame. He said, "Because no one would believe me. Because I was weak." The hallway felt smaller, walls pressing against them both. David whispered, "You betrayed me." Mark lowered his eyes, silent, as the storm outside rattled the glass. At the edge of the storm, David walked the empty street, his thoughts collapsing into chaos. He whispered, "Everything was a lie." Rain pelted down, soaking him, but he didn't move. Emily appeared from the shadows, her face unreadable. She said, "You weren't supposed to know." David's eyes burned, his voice sharp. He said, "You lied to me too." Emily's expression wavered, pain cutting through her mask. She whispered, "It wasn't my secret to tell." David's chest heaved, rage clawing at his ribs. He said, "You let me believe she was mine." Emily stepped closer, her voice cracking. She said, "I thought it would save you." The rain blurred her face, but the truth was clear. Every word was another betrayal. David whispered, "You all broke me." The night swallowed his voice, but his pain screamed louder than thunder. Inside the hospital, the truth pressed harder. David stood near the crib, staring at the baby who had rewritten his world. His voice shook as he whispered, "What are you to me?" The nurse shifted uneasily, her gaze soft with pity. She said, "She only needs love. The rest is noise." David's hands trembled, hovering above the child as if afraid to touch. He muttered, "I don't know if I can." The nurse's eyes held quiet strength. She said, "Blood doesn't make a father. Choice does." His heart twisted, the words sinking into places he didn't want touched. He whispered, "Everyone lied to me." The nurse said softly, "But she never did." The baby stirred, a tiny hand stretching toward him. David's tears blurred the room, and his voice cracked, "What if I can't save her?" Silence wrapped him, but the child's breath was answer enough. The confrontation erupted in the family living room, shadows dancing under the storm outside. David shouted, "You all betrayed me?" His mother's voice cracked, "We did it to protect you." His eyes burned with fury. He said, "You broke me instead." Mark stepped forward, his face pale with guilt. He said, I couldn't be her father. I failed. David's chest heaved, his hands shaking with rage. He said, "So, you gave me the lie instead." Emily whispered, "We thought it was mercy." David's voice tore through the room. "Mercy? You've turned my life into a grave." Silence followed, heavier than the storm. Tears streaked his face, but he didn't hide them. He whispered, "I'll never forgive you." The air crackled, every bond shattered. No truth could mend what had been broken in that moment. The courtroom was suffocating, every gaze fixed on David as if he were already condemned. His lawyer whispered, "Stay calm," but calm was impossible. Emily stood across the room, her arms folded, her silence a weapon. The judge's voice cut like thunder. He said, "This is not about secrets. This is about the child." David's pulse roared in his ears, his fists trembling against the table. He whispered, "I can't lose her." His mother sat behind him, her face stone, refusing to meet his eyes. Mark stood beside Emily, head bowed, but unrepentant. David's voice cracked as he muttered, "You lied and I paid the price." The judge raised his hand, silencing the tension. He said, "The truth will decide custody." David's heart broke open, rage and desperation colliding inside him. He whispered, "Then let the truth finally be heard." The storm outside mirrored the storm inside. David rose to his feet, his voice trembling but loud. He said, "You all buried me under lies." His gaze locked on Emily. He shouted, "You let me believe." Emily's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Mark's face tightened, guilt clear yet hidden behind defiance. David turned to the judge, his eyes wet. He whispered, "I deserve the chance to be her father." The judge leaned back, fingers steepled, waiting for silence. The room grew smaller, each breath tighter than the last. His mother finally spoke, her voice brittle. She said, "David was never meant to know." David's chest heaved, his voice cracking like glass. He said, "But I do know, and I will not abandon her." The storm's thunder shook the building as if the world itself bore witness. David's voice broke as he spoke directly to the room. He said, "I grew up fatherless. I know what it means to be abandoned." His chest burned as he turned toward Mark, his brother shrinking under the truth. David shouted, "And now you would leave her too?" Mark's jaw clenched, his voice sharp. He said, "I was weak, but you were blind." The words struck hard, echoing across the chamber. Emily whispered, "Stop this." But David ignored her, his heart tearing open. He muttered, "All I wanted was a life without pain. And now, she's the only reason I'm still standing." The silence thickened until the judge's gavel cracked the air. He said, "This is not a fight of blood alone. This is about who will not walk away." David whispered, "Then I will not walk away." The storm raged louder as the gavel fell, but David didn't sit. His voice cracked, his words shaking. He said, "You think I'll fail her? You think I'll break? But I won't." His eyes darted between Emily and his mother, his chest rising like a man about to drown. He muttered, "I will not be my father." Emily's voice cut through, sharp and bitter. She said, "You are already him." The words tore into him, deeper than he thought possible. His hands shook, but his voice rose. He said, "No, I'm standing here." That's more than he ever did. Mark lowered his eyes, unable to answer. The judge leaned forward, his voice low but heavy. He said, "The child deserves someone who chooses her." David's voice trembled, but it carried. He whispered, "Then I choose her, every day, no matter what it costs me." The silence after his words was unbearable, thick enough to suffocate. The judge lowered his gaze, the room frozen in suspended breath. Emily looked at David with fire in her eyes, but the tremble in her lip betrayed her. Mark turned away, shame swallowing him whole. David's chest rose and fell, his body trembling from the weight of the storm. He whispered, "I will fight until I have nothing left." His mother finally wept, her tears spilling like cracks in stone. she said softly. Maybe you are stronger than I thought. David's eyes glistened as he whispered, I have to be. The storm outside broke into thunder that rattled the windows, the sound like the world declaring war. For the first time, David stood tall, no longer just a man shattered by secrets, but one ready to bear the fire of truth. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile calm. David walked into the hospital room where the baby slept, her tiny breaths filling the silence. His hands trembled as he reached for the crib, stopping just short of touching her. He whispered, I don't know if I'm enough, but I'll never run. The words felt heavier than steel. The nurse stepped quietly inside, her eyes soft. She said, she doesn't need perfection. She needs presence. David's throat tightened as tears welled. He muttered, I can't promise I won't fail. The nurse whispered, all parents fail. But the ones who stay, they heal the child anyway. David's chest cracked open at her words, his breath sharp but steadying. He whispered again, then I'll stay, no matter what it costs me. For the first time, his heart accepted the weight, not as a curse, but as a vow. David stood outside his mother's house, the door looming like a wall he had avoided his whole life. When she opened it, her eyes were tired, red from nights of guilt. She said, why are you here? His voice cracked as he whispered, because I need you to see me. Her lips trembled, her body stiff, as though bracing for battle. David muttered, you've carried lies that burned us both, but I can't carry this without ending up like him. His mother's shoulders sagged, tears slipping down her lined face. She whispered, I only wanted to protect you. His chest heaved as he said, you broke me instead. Her voice cracked with regret. She whispered, I see that now. The silence stretched, not warm, not forgiving, but heavy with fragile truth. For the first time, neither turned away. Emily sat at the cafe table, her arms folded as always, but her eyes carried a weight she could no longer hide. David sat opposite, shoulders hunched, voice low. He whispered, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to say I'll never abandon her. Emily's lips pressed thin, her voice bitter. She said, you think words fix what's broken? David shook his head slowly. He muttered, no, but they're all I have left, and I'll back them with everything I am. Emily's expression cracked, pain leaking through her armor. She whispered, I don't know if she'll ever forgive us. David's throat tightened, but his voice was steady. He said, she doesn't have to forgive us. She only needs to know we stayed. The silence that followed was not peace, but it was no longer war. David visited Mark under a gray sky, the air heavy with unspoken words. Mark leaned against the hood of his car, face hollow with guilt. David stopped a few feet away, his voice raw. He said, you should have told me. Mark's eyes lowered, his voice hoarse. He said, I was afraid. David's fists clenched, then fell open. He whispered, afraid of me or of yourself? Silence stretched, Mark unable to answer. David muttered, you failed her. But I'll be damned if I do the same. Mark's face twisted, shame pulling at every line. He whispered, then be stronger than me. David's eyes burned, his voice shaking. He said, I will. The moment ended, not with forgiveness, but with finality, as if both brothers knew their bond could never fully mend. Night returned, but for the first time it did not suffocate. David sat in the nursery chair, holding the baby close, her tiny breath warming his chest. His eyes brimmed with tears, but his lips curved into a fragile smile. He whispered, I thought you would destroy me. Instead, you saved me. The baby stirred, her small fingers curling against his shirt. David's chest rose steady, the storm inside quieted by her presence. He muttered, I don't know if I'll be perfect, but I will be here, always. The silence was full, not empty, filled with the weight of his vow. His heart, once shattered, beat steady with something new, not just fear, but hope. He whispered one last time, you are my future, and I won't walk away. The night wrapped them both, fragile but unbroken. The courtroom was empty now, echoes lingering like ghosts. David stood alone, his reflection caught in the polished wood of the bench. His chest rose unevenly as he whispered, "It's over," but it's not. His mother entered quietly, her steps fragile. She said, "You did more than I ever thought you could." His jaw clenched, his eyes burning. He muttered, "But it cost everything." Her voice cracked. She whispered, "The cost is what makes it real." He turned, tears streaking his face, his voice trembling. He said, "Then I'll bear it." The silence stretched between them, heavy but final, as though both knew this was not healing, only survival. His mother's eyes glistened with regret, but she said nothing more. David whispered, "I will never forgive you." The words hung in the still air, sharp enough to wound them both forever. Outside, the city glowed under the street lamps, slick from earlier rain. David walked slowly, his footsteps heavy against the wet pavement. Emily appeared across the street, her face pale under the light. She said, "You've changed." His lips trembled as he whispered, "Not enough." She crossed toward him, her eyes conflicted, every step hesitant. She muttered, "Shall need both of us even if we hate each other." David's chest tightened, his voice rough. He said, "I don't know if I can ever stand beside you." Emily looked away, her expression breaking. She whispered, "You don't have to. Just don't leave her." David's breath shook, but he nodded faintly. He whispered, "I won't." The night pressed heavy around them, but for a moment the distance between them was not war, only uneasy truth. At the park, the morning sun broke through clouds, children laughing in the distance. David sat on a bench, the baby cradled gently in his arms. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You will never know the lies that built your beginning." His chest rose slowly, each breath carrying both weight and release. He muttered, "But you will know me." The baby stirred, her small hand curling around his finger. His eyes filled with tears, his smile fragile but real. He said softly, "They can strip me of everything, but not this." The world moved on around him, laughter and life continuing. But for David, time slowed. His voice trembled as he whispered, "You saved me before I even learned how to save you." His words drifted into the air, carried by the wind, as though the world itself needed to hear them. David stood at his father's grave, the grass wet with morning dew. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You left me nothing but scars." He pressed his hand against the cold stone, his heart heavy with old anger. He muttered, "But I will not leave her." The silence of the cemetery was absolute, broken only by the wind weaving through trees. His shoulders shook, grief and rage colliding in waves. He said, "You don't deserve forgiveness, but she deserves a father." His tears fell onto the ground, soaking into the earth above the name he had once hated. He whispered, "This ends with me." For the first time, the chains of his past loosened, not gone, but broken enough for him to breathe. The grave remained silent, but his vow filled the air like thunder without sound. Night wrapped the nursery in silence, the lamp casting a golden glow. David held the baby close, his lips pressed to her tiny forehead. His voice broke as he whispered, "I never wanted to be a father, until you called me yours." His chest shook, his tears falling onto her blanket, but his arms held steady. He muttered, "They tried to take you from me. They tried to bury me in their lies, but you'll always know who I am." The baby stirred, her breath warm against his chest, her presence more powerful than any storm. David's eyes closed as he whispered one final vow. He said, "You are my beginning and my end, and I will never walk away." Silence followed, heavy yet holy, the kind of silence that lingers long after words are gone. His story ended not in triumph, but in unshakable love.